Welcome to Newsmax TV. I'm Kathleen Walter. With us now is the National Director of the Anti-Defamation League, Mr. Abe Foxman. He's the author of the brand new book, Viral Hate, Containing Its Spread on the Internet, co-written with ADL Civil Rights Chair Chris Wolf. And Mr. Foxman, it's terrific to have you back with us on Newsmax TV today.
It's good to be back. Thank you.
Well, in Viral Hate, you explore the epidemic of internet hate. Why does it exist? And can you give us some examples of the real harm that online hate does to people in society?
Well, it's a superhighway for good things and bad things. A lot of good things coming out of the internet. More education, more information, more exchange, people being able to talk to each other, share ideas. But at the same time, it provides a underbelly, a dark underbelly, a superhighway for bigots. Bigots can now communicate their hatred, their prejudice, their racism, their anti-Semitism in nanoseconds globally. They can do it under a veil of anonymity, and it never goes away. It's almost like a tsunami of words, and unfortunately, many of them hateful, hurtful words.
And who's targeted the most here?
Well, minorities, victims of stereotype, what's historically been the targets, minority groups, Jews, gypsies, gays, Hispanics, to the Muslims it's Christians, to some Christians it's Muslims. So it's a new vehicle, it's a new highway to single out the other, whoever the other may be. We've seen it recently of a very dramatic, painful proportion in bullying. Society has lived with bullying. It's an everyday occurrence. We're now learning that anywhere from one out of two kids at one time in their life, kids or young adults, are subject to bullying. And it's usually in a playground, it's usually in a classroom, it's usually in a private setting, in a small group. Now with the internet, it's cyberbullying, and so what we have seen is kids who have been bullied on the cyber space. Some of them could not deal with it because it wasn't just in the classroom; it was global, and committed suicides. We've seen a whole slew of that in the last several years. So here's bigotry, here's prejudice on a very, very localized level because of the internet. Now goes cyber, and has these serious consequences. We've also seen in the Middle East, Kathleen, some of the videos on the internet which have resulted in death and people marching in the streets violently. Even a film that wasn't a film on the internet stirred up hate in a Muslim world, and people died.
Is there an antidote to the virus of hate that's infected the internet, or is the problem too big to address?
Well, we're not ready to give up. It's a big problem. I think it needs some inventive, creative approaches. The classic approach to hate speech has been good speech. You answer bad speech with good speech, So somebody appears on your show, says something that is hurtful to some people, you invite somebody else. You do one press release, another press release. This is a tsunami. How do you deal with it? What we're finding is it's very, very difficult to match good speech with bad speech when the bad speech can so overwhelm. So I think we need to find new paradigms. I think the question of we shouldn't not deal with the issues of the First Amendment. I think the First Amendment, certainly we know in the media, we know as minorities, is so important to our democratic system. But I think we need to focus on the responsibility of the providers, of the servers, of these companies who make money out of the internet and providing the platforms, as well as challenging individuals, families. I think families need to take a responsibility for their kids, what they're watching, what they see. I think communities need to be alert that in addition to this magnificent boon to education and information, it has a dark side which needs to be brought to the attention of the providers and of the servers.
Mm-hmm. And why is the internet so appealing for haters? Is it because there's this cloak of anonymity that folks can assume when they go online?
Absolutely, Kathleen. Many years ago, we in the Anti-Defamation League, in fighting the Ku Klux Klan, developed and advocated a law which removed the mask from from the Klan. Once people had to take responsibility for the bigotry, many of these bigots were not willing to burn crosses or march in the streets. So it removed the anonymity, and it basically broke the back of the Klan. Comes 50 years later, and that mask of hate, that anonymity, is put back on the bigot. And I think what we're seeing, probably the first change in the law, will be the removing of anonymity. People want to be bigots, fine. The First Amendment protects their rights, but they need to take responsibility. We've just seen it in France. Facebook was actually ordered by the court to provide the names of anti-Semites who were broadcasting their hatred or communicating it on the internet. We're seeing here in the United States that there are efforts now made to say that you should not protect bigots. I think that will be the first adjustment to this new revolution of communication, which again, as we say, has a lot of good, but has some bad.
Now, in the wake of the George Zimmerman verdict, the nation is still plagued by random acts of violence and hate talk on the internet. What does this say about race relations and intolerance in our country? And do you think the president was right to insert himself into the debate?
The answer, yes, I think the president was right. We have elected an African-American president. That's a huge step in terms of fighting a racist society, but we haven't eliminated racism, and it's still there. And I think at this stage in the president's tenure, I think it's right for him, it's appropriate for him, without preaching, but to almost legitimize a conversation, to discuss it. And I think the tone that he used he personalized it, I think is a healthy thing, which will help heal rather than exacerbate.
And Mr. Foxman, while we have you here, I'd like to get your take on some stories making headlines today. As you're aware, the Israelis and Palestinians have agreed to meet again to broker a peace deal. Talks are expected to last 9 months. What do you see as the odds that something will get done?
I'm an optimist. Sometimes out of nothing can come something. I think that the dynamics have changed in the Middle East in the last year or two. I'm an optimist in the sense that if both these parties are sitting down, and they will be sitting down one-on-one or two-on-two without intermediaries, I think the atmosphere is better in this following sense. The environment, the toxic environment, is less. That means the opponents for peace, Hamas, is no longer as potent as it was a year ago. Those even in Egypt who were opposed to normalization, all the forces of the Hezbollah, Syria, all the toxic forces, and Iran with it, are less potent today to damage movement towards peace. At the same time, the elements in the Middle East, like the Saudis and the Gulf, who are more moderate, I think are more empowered, have a greater interest to embrace peace. And that's what we need, is an environment that is willing to promote it rather than undermine it. This may be the moment in time. I think it's courageous on both sides. I think Prime Minister Netanyahu, the decision to release prisoners almost as a precondition, I think is a very significant, courageous step. I hope we will see courageous steps from the Palestinian side as well. But I'm an optimist. I don't think they would have gotten this far without a lot of conversations and some agreement to move forward. I think anybody expecting a major breakthrough of end of conflict will be disappointed. But if we can take small steps in the right direction, build trust, build the economy, keep the level of violence down, maybe we'll get there in our lifetime.
In your view, should Israel agree to pre-1967 borders?
No, I don't know. The answer is they won't. I don't think it's a precondition. I think when you look at the map, you got to start somewhere. No, I don't think any resolution will bring it back to 67 borders. 67 borders were not defensible. They, in fact, almost were an invitation to attack. Well, the 67 borders have changed vis-a-vis Egypt. They've changed vis-a-vis Jordan. So, yeah, there will be changes with the Palestinians. They are talking about swaps. There are certain facts on the ground. So, yeah, maybe a frame of reference, but I don't see any way that a resolution will bring about going back to 67.
And given reports of a strained U.S.-Israel relationship, can Israel expect the Obama administration to be a fair middleman in peace talks, if you will? And how would you describe the relationship between the U.S. and Israel at this time?
I think there's a reset in the relationship. I think as a result, partially the visit of the president to Israel and the Middle East the last several months. But I would say that the relationship in the significant areas are very strong. That means in the military relationship, the intelligence relationship is very supportive and they're very closely allied. The differences were political. And I think that too, there's been a reset. I think there are no surprises. I think the fact that Secretary Kerry was able to get the trust of both sides says to me that there is a greater trust between the Israeli government and the U.S. And the issue, the incentive, if you will, is Iran. Iran is the elephant. Iran is the threat. Iran is the destabilizer. And I think there is a common interest, certainly between the United States and Israel, because it's not only about Israel, it's about stability, it's about our role, it's about future of oil reserves, it's about our other allies, the Saudis and the Gulf. So all of a sudden there's a new interest. So I would put the relationship at a much higher level than it's ever been before, motivated by joint common interests, strategic interests, and I don't think that what we're seeing is America pushing Israel in a direction that it is not willing to go.
Given Iran's nuclear ambitions, do you see or foresee an Israeli military action in the near future?
I don't know what near future. I think if Israel, it's very clear that if Israel feels that its existence is threatened by a nuclear Iran, and Iran is going nuclear and nobody else is dealing to stop it, the answer is yes. They will act to protect their country and their people. I think the events in the last year or two, the world's apathy, indifference, paralysis, when we're watching Syria bleed, where over 100,000 people, mostly innocent men and women, as a result of the violence there, and the world is not responding. That's a telltale prognosis in terms of what Israel looks around and sees that the world talks but really doesn't care. So if Israel perceives that Iran will have the bomb, the world will not respond, I think the answer is yeah.
Is there a resurgence of radical Islam in the Middle East that is threatening Israel?
Well, I think it's threatening democracy. Yeah, what we're seeing in the struggle in Egypt, the struggle in Syria, the Lebanon, Hezbollah, Jordan is feeling pressures. Yeah, it's not only threatening Israel; it's threatening democratic elements, forces, institutions. But Israel has shown that if it feels it's threatened, it will stand up and act. And the important thing is to have the support of the United States, because Europe, Kathleen, is not there. Europe is a wishy-washy ally, and all it's been doing in the last year or so is threatening Israel with sanctions, with boycotts, rather than supporting it in the threat of extremist growing Muslim fanaticism.
And that's sort of my last question for you. The European Union recently announced increased pressure on Israel regarding settlements. The ADL condemned the EU for this. Is the EU biased against Israel, and if so, why?
Well, I think Europe has always been somewhat biased in the issue between Arabs and Palestinians. I think it's their perception of their self-interest. It's also part of their colonial history and baggage, where they feel certain affinities. To some extent, there's anti-Semitism, but I don't think it's motivated just by that. But Europe has yet not catharsized its past and able to look at Israel and a Jewish state and a Jewish sovereign state. And it's ironic that the new European states post Soviet, the failure of the Soviet Union, what is called the former Soviet republics, that they are more understanding. It's the Poland and the Czech Republic and the Bulgarians who are more understanding and friendly towards Israel and are now trying to balance the EU. But unfortunately, the EU has a balance, a bias towards the Palestinians.
All right. Well, again, the book is called Viral Hate, Containing Its Spread on the Internet, written by Abe Foxman and Chris Wolf, available on Amazon. It's a terrific read. Mr. Foxman, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Kathleen. Good to be with you.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.